The Sarens giant crane SGC-120 is designed for heavy lifting in petrochemical, nuclear and similar applications. Its capacity is huge. It can lift 3,200 tonnes at 30 metre radius and even 1,000 tonnes at 80 metre radius. The boom is 130 metres long and the hook block on its own weighs an incredible 105 tonnes. This 1:50 scale model of the Sarens giant crane is made by WSI and comes in two huge boxes. One box is over 22 kilograms, the other is nearly 26 kilograms, and you can see how large they are compared to a normal WSI truck model. The initial packaging of both boxes is the same, and if we open the first one up we see that there's a giant picture sleeve contained inside. These boxes are huge, so it's definitely a two-person job to handle them. Once you've cut the ties you can try and drop the inner box from the sleeve, but really that doesn't work and you have to cut the sleeve to get the box out. Opening the first of the boxes, the parts are contained in layers, and the top layer contains some parts of the boom and the A-frame. The second layer contains 36 containers which are used to hold the ballast for the crane. And in the bottom is the ring, which is pre-assembled and accounts for the large dimensions of the box. The second box contains a layer of boom parts, again all held in place with plastic ties. And underneath that is the upper deck, the 4 bogies and the hook block. There is a comprehensive instruction manual which wasn't included with the review model but is sent separately, and it's also available online. The manual includes a parts list and clear helpful photos, and there's a rigging diagram which is clear enough but it has 1 or 2 inconsistencies with the photos. With the parts out the box, assembly can begin. The first thing to find is a good flat surface with plenty of space around to build the model. With the boom down, the model is nearly 3.3 metres or 10 feet long, and it's best to build it up in the place that it's going to be displayed because moving it is difficult. Once the ring is in place you can put the 4 bogies on the track, and you just need to make sure that those are lined up correctly on the track, and then they roll nice and smoothly. Once you've got the bogies down and more or less lined up, you can then fix on the upper deck. There are no fixed connections on these parts, there are just pins on the upper deck which interlock with holes in the bogie beams. Although it looks a mess at the moment, it all comes good when you get it lined up, and it really is a two-person job to try and do this properly because of the heavy weight of the upper deck. After a bit of fiddling, the 4 pins line up with the holes in the bogies, and then the deck rests flat onto the bogies, and at that point you can rotate the whole thing really quite smoothly. For the next part it's best to pre-assemble the massive A-frame which sits above the deck. All of the lattice sections of the A-frame and boom are really massive parts which fit together in a very well engineered way. The connections feel like they're going to be strong, and they are quite large screws which give confidence that the model's going to take the huge loads that are going to be put on it. The large parts also make it easy to build, except when they get too large. The large tension ties at the back of the A-frame are all suitably massive. They are very large metal box sections, and it's good to see that they're actually made in separate pieces, which means you could split them down into suitable transport loads. Again, joining all the parts up is quite a pleasure because they fit together well. The screws fit in easily, so it's really a straightforward job just to build up these components ready for the major assembly. Once the A-frame is fully built up, you can then offer it up onto the upper deck. And again, as you can see here, this is really a two-person job. That A-frame really is very heavy, and you need extra hands just to guide things into place. But the good news is that the model engineering is very good because everything fits into place and there's no need to force anything to try and get it to fit. The A-frame can then be secured in position with some large nuts and bolts that are supplied. And if you need them, there's even a couple of spanners supplied with the model to do up the nuts and bolts. Once you've got the A-frame in place, you've already built quite a massive model. The counterweight for the real crane is produced by loading 36 containers with locally run material, and on the model you do that by getting some sand from a DIY shop or whatever and loading up the containers that are supplied with the model. In this sense, the philosophy of the model is true to the real crane, and WSI have been sensible to avoid shipping even more weight with the model. Once the container is loaded, there are 3 cross ties which go across the top of the containers. 2 of them provide an interlock for the container above. They also have lifting eyes, but you couldn't use them for that unless you glue them in place. Once the container is loaded, you can place it into position on the back of the crane. As I said, there were 36 of these containers, so it is a significant job to load them all up and then put them into place on the back of the crane. And you just go on stacking them higher and higher until you've got them all in place. And at this point you can imagine how heavy the model is getting. The next operation, with the boom fully built up, is to attach it to the upper deck. Again, this is a 2-person job, with one guiding the boom and the other getting the bolts in. Fortunately, the model engineering is very good once again, because the holes do line up easily, and so getting the bolts in isn't a problem. There is one issue with the model at this point though, which is that the bolts that WSI supply for fixing the boom are actually a little bit too short, so you can't fit a nut onto the end of them. It's not really an engineering problem with the model, because the bolts aren't actually going to come out with the boom in place, but cosmetically it's incomplete. Next in sequence, as per the instructions, is to reeve the hook, and that's a big job. There are 4 separate winches, and although the pulleys are nice and big to get the thread through, it is very difficult to keep the lines taut and staying on the pulleys, particularly at the boom head where they can jump off some of the pulleys. At this point I could have made the video a few hours long showing all the reeving, but I guess that's not so interesting. The instructions recommend reeving the luffing gear with the boom in its final position, and that's a difficult thing to do, so I made a little frame here and used a special curved pin to get the thread through the various pulleys. Whichever way it's done, it's slow, painstaking and sometimes frustrating. One thing that's not recommended is to try and move the model, but if you have to, the thing you can try and use is some clamps to try and clamp the thread onto the various pulleys on both the hook and on the luffing gear. And this can be reasonably successful, but even so it's easy to find threads jumping off the pulleys. Once you've completed all the reeving, you've finished the assembly, and the crane stands tall. Very tall. Now we'll take a look at some of the closer details on the model and start with the big ring at the bottom. This is all metal and appears to be made up of separate components, and the lifting eyes in the spreader plates are detailed within the casting. The bogies are almost all metal, and they're large models in their own right. There's a plastic platform on the inside, and all of the drive motors on the bogie wheels are plastic, but the colour match is excellent. On the underside there are nice metal rollers, and there's a degree of articulation too, but there's no detailing in terms of hoses or cables or very small graphics of the kind that WSI often provide. However, the bogies do look good, and you get a sense of the scale of them when you pose them with other models. The upper deck is a large metal part with metal handrails all round, and it's got a very good structure. The large metal beams are certainly of heavy construction, and they all look impressive. The layout of the upper deck is fairly simple, but the containers look very good, as do the large winches, and there are hydraulic hoses between them. There's also a small operator's cabin which can fit on either side of the crane. It's plastic, but the detailing inside is very good. Another very nicely modelled part is the 2 access stairways. They're metal and they've got excellent non-slip surfacing. Looking at the ballast containers, they are well detailed, but that's because they are tough plastic, which is probably the right material given that they're going to be filled with sand or other materials. But the good news is that the colour match with metal parts is very good, and they certainly do look impressive when stacked up on the back of the crane. The boom sections are heavy and very well made. They're not single castings, but made up of a number of pieces which are jointed and fit together. But the best bit about it is that the circular tubes which make up the boom sections really are circular, so the boom sections do look realistic, and they're very, very strong. These are certainly impressive die-cast parts, with the thickness of the tubes being noteworthy. The overall effect, when combined with the other parts of the cross bracing, is to produce a really good looking engineering structure. Both at the A-frame and the boom head there are silver metal pulleys used, and the associated metal castings are good. The boom itself is a tremendous piece of model engineering because of its size and its obvious strength, and it's capped off with a heavy boom head with multiple pulleys. And that finally brings us onto the hook block, which is suitably massive in keeping with the rest of the model. In fact, it would make a good display piece just on its own. The hook section fully rotates below the hook block, and the hooks themselves are very nice castings. One nice little feature of the hook is that the safety latches are all spring-loaded and work very well. And as you can see, the big block is made up of a number of smaller hook blocks, all with free rolling pulleys, but there doesn't seem to be any way to split out the smaller blocks for use separately. One really good aspect of the hook though is that it's very well detailed with excellent graphics giving the safe working load of the various parts. In some respects, the main feature of the model is its size. It's about 2.6 meters high when it's built up, and so you certainly need a lot of display space to be able to show it. To look at the size a different way, here is the upper deck, and if we look underneath it, there's easily enough space to have a truck crane parked. Of course, why the Cranes etc. riggers trapped a crane under there in the first place is anybody's guess. Perhaps the most impressive feature of the model is the way all of that weight gets carried onto the ring, and yet the whole thing can be turned really quite smoothly, and with the feeling that the whole thing feels sturdy and safe. In case you were wondering, the real crane can turn at a speed of about 1 revolution per minute. The other feature you can operate is the hook and luffing the boom. For the hook you need to operate the 4 inner winches and operate them all in turn, and really this is very difficult because unless they're moved a small amount in sequence, the thread will jump off the pulleys both at the boom head and on the hook, and the same is true of the boom winches. Another display option you have is to use a number of the parts for loads on suitable transport, but of course you'd need an awful lot of trucks to be able to show the majority of the model out on the road. So how do we sum up the SGC-120 model? It's very expensive and beyond the reach of most collectors, and there are less of the smaller details found on other WSI crane models. But the simple and massive design of the real crane has been captured perfectly, and for that reason it is outstanding.